When we last left our heroes, they had narrowly escaped the collapsing mansion of an ancient sorcerer king, a beholder turned archmage Orgrifflagen, who was long dead, whose consciousness he had transferred. He had transferred his own consciousness into the body of a kind of prototype warforged. During that transfer, something went wrong, and he had lost most of his memories and his identity, and was trapped in his mansion for many centuries. Now, under the name Cthulhu, he met the party after they defeated his friends and bodyguards, and they looted his trade table and decided to leave the mansion with him because he didn't seem to be antagonistic or violent or anything like that. The party escaped the collapsing mansion and now find themselves in on the top of Fort Platino, deciding their next move. This episode and the events that I'm about to describe, I knew they were going to be exciting. I didn't know what would happen because a lot of this was really up to the players, but I had a few pieces, and I had one thing that I was pretty sure was going to happen. And by the end of it, we all walked away from this session really buzzing and really enjoying ourselves. So let's get into tonight's episode, tonight's campaign diary of Ghost in the Machine, titled Killer in Me. The party, after some deliberation, decides to leave Fort Platino to go to Still Tower, the local municipality. They, after some deliberation and discussion, decide on a few things. Professor Vasilier and Cthulhu will go with Professor Vasilier back to the capital Gish, where Vasilier is going to craft the weapon for Silvilius, and he'll send it to him. Silvilius is traveling with the Countess, so he should be relatively easy to find. They decide that they need to investigate the Still Tower, Putra Still Tower, the issue there further, to see what, if anything, they can do about him. Because he's obviously mistreating his citizens. People are obviously suffering. Things are not good. And because of the green flame that they saw in the middle of the night last night, they know that there's something infernal going on. And Justice wants to track down the dagger that he read about in Foreman Biggles' diary. He thinks it's pretty far-fetched, but hey, he read about it. He's hoping, he can find it some way, somehow. He's on the hunt. He's on the chase. So they go back to Still Tower at the Briar Shadow Meadery. It's been a night, and it's been about a good better part of a day since they fought the bandits, and the bandits have actually successfully cleared out and made for Cardoon, all except for one, Carlisle, the elven mage wizard. They speak to Carlisle again. He tells them, that he's broken with the Shadow Thieves. He wasn't really... he had lost his taste for banditry, and then he tells them the party has broken for Cardoon and is left for Cardoon. Cardoon is a slave state and magocracy that's north of Gish. It's located on the western continent. It's a state. It's an independent state. It's a magocracy. It's also a slave state. It's located north of Gishari. It's not too far from where they are now. Carlisle thinks it's a pretty bad idea, but he says that they've burned, the Shadow Thieves have burned too many bridges. They don't really feel like they have more to go, and they're going to try to make a life in Cardoon. Whether as slavers or whatever, they're going to try. So Carlisle says, I've stayed on. I'm doing some bookkeeping for the inn. I'm thinking about going to Cragmandu and trying to make an honest day's work. And he explains to them, we were veterans, and that's, the Presidium, which is the Congress, broke their pact with us, and they broke their agreement to give soldiers lands and money after the war. And that's why they turned to banditry, because there's not, in this kind of developing economy, there's not a lot of work for everyone. A lot of the work is, magically automated, and the Warforged creates kind of a surplus labor population and things like that. So they talk to Carlisle briefly. He just says, I'm here, but, let's let bygones be bygones. I didn't know I was sending into a fight. I figured they would, employ you. So that happens, and the party has a quick discussion about going to find the dagger. Dryden is a corpse bother. He's a doctor, right? And they ask Busy about the gnome, and she says, I remember the murders of Fort Platino 115 years ago. I was alive. I'm a gnome. Gnomes live up to be 500 years old. She's like, there was he came in here, he attacked me, I shot him in the face, he was being hunted down by the national police at the time, which became the Imperial Confessory. They cornered him up north, killed him, buried his body, and that was the end of it. The same day, that day, a little girl died, I think another of Bigeldew's victims. So Justice says, oh, dang, he was buried, maybe on the off chance he was buried with a dagger or something. Let's, check this out. So Justice and Dryden and Cthulhu all go to the graveyard, and the rest of the party is like, we're not doing this. We're not corpse bothering. We're not grave digging. They go to the graveyard, and they disturb the grave of Bigelow. They dig. A spell is released once they do that. And once they exhume his body, and they are beset upon by ghouls, and so a few ghouls and a few ghasts. Things get pretty dire. They all kind of attack Dryden because he's the one who disturbed the skeleton first, the gnomish skeleton that they bothered first, and he almost goes down. But Cthulhu, who is a wizard, casts fireball and pretty much dispenses with most of the enemies, except for the ghast, which had a few hit points and gets finished off by Justice. Dryden, who because of his background is able to discern that it's funny, Carl wasn't actually there, so I had to do I had set up this moment, we'll get to this, but I had set up this really cool moment for Dryden, and he ended up not being there, and he ended up being there. But Dryden explains that, you can't be for certain, but skeletal remains are generally, their genders are identified on a spectrum. There's not really, a 1 and a 2. It's more like a 1 to 6. And he says this we can't be for certain, but the skeletal remains seem to be of a younger and more feminine body than we would expect from a hardened foreman of a mine who seemed to be pretty old at the time of his writing. Once that's established, they assume that the body is from the girl who died the same day that Foreman Bigelow was supposed to. And Justice relays this. They travel back. Justice and Selena talk about the situation, and they figure that this sounds a lot like a recruitment by the College of Whispers and or the Imperial Confessory. Every once in a while, when, back in their spy days, when you find a particularly brutal and lethal and effective killer, if you can, you recruit him to your cause rather than dispense him. If he could be reasoned with, you should recruit him. So they decide that the Imperial Confessory likely recruited Bigelow, or the College of Whispers did, and they decide to check on information the College of Whispers in Cragmandu. At some point during the conversation, at some point during that later conversation, Selena kind of calls out. She's like, "Is there a cleric here?" And a young little gnome who had been listening in on the whole time, Erky Timbers, bursts from his table. He's a paladin, not a cleric, and he was actually the gravekeeper of the Pauper's grave at Still Tower, and that Justice and Dryden and Cthulhu just came from, and says, I'm right here. I'm here to help. I call him Erky Timbers, which is a name I got from the Sunless Citadel, the 3rd edition module. So Erky introduces himself as the gravekeeper, and Justice says, "Didn't you hear me? I was going to the grave. Why didn't you help me?" And Erky just basically says, "Well, you didn't ask me. I didn't want to impose on your, He's like, "I, would appreciate if you didn't grave rob." He's like, there was undead there." He's like, "Oh, wow, yeah." So I have a little conversation there. Chase thought it was funny that the gravekeeper didn't go with him, or didn't even offer his services. Like, I was like, he didn't ask, and I didn't really feel like volunteering the help was really the gist of it. In game, I said Erky, had just finished his shift, and he wasn't really quite ready to go back there, Kind of, it was, and both were kind of more or less true, so. They talked to Erky about Putrid Still Tower, the current Lord of Still Tower, and the tower, who resides in the Tower of Silence. At some point during the conversation, wow, hi, can I help you? Gather information. They talk to Busy and Erky and others about Lord Still Tower. Also in the inn seems to be other people who are kind of listening in who seem more antagonistic and hostile. Selena kind of reads them and says these people might be being paid by Still Tower to protect the place. We should keep our voices down, that kind of thing. No fight ensues, but it was something they noted. At that point, Lord Still Tower, Putrid Still Tower, actually comes in. He has a black cat on his shoulder. He's dressed to the nines in dark leathers. He has a staff with a red gem, a cloak with bat-like wings. that looks like bat wings and comes in kind of hobbling, comes in, gets a plate of food from Busy, the proprietor, and leaves. And he stares at the party for quite a while. It was particularly Cthulhu, but he mostly just stares at the party while he waits for his food and then leaves. The party, in horror and shock, ask, how often does he come in here? And Busy says, not very often, but every once in a while he comes in for some food. And they're like, oh man, have you ever, and Busy says, I traveled north and bought poison from a hag. Spent 1,200 gold on that poison I did. Slipped it in his food and drink, and he was fine. He didn't even notice. He didn't mention it. Nothing. So the party gathers that he's immune to poison, and he just simply didn't notice the incredibly deadly poison that was put in his food at some point. So the party makes note of that, decides that they're not ready to take him on after seeing him and all of his magic rigmarole, and they rest at the Briar Shadow Meadery, and I have them roll wisdom saves, not for a madness effect, but for a corruption effect that I stole from Matthew Mercer, who put the rules for free online. You can get them from the DM's Guild. I'll if I remember, I'll put a link down yonder there in the description. They all successfully roll. The DC wasn't very high. None of them gets corrupted. And then they make for Cragmandu. Before departing ways with Vasilier and Cthulhu, Gilly pulls Vasilier aside and talks about augmentation. Vasilier, as we said, has one of his eyes replaced, has half of his hand gone. In fact, I think an entire hand gone. And Gilly, having recently lost her hand, is curious about augmentation. He says, it's dwarven technology, and that you're going to have to go. If you make for Elder's Rise, you can go to the Dwarven capital. The Elder's Rise is a human city it's a market city that sits on top of the entrance to the mountain doors to a Dwarven city. You can go there. You can look up Iona Axebeard Ironfoot. He's give him my card, tell him I sent you, and he will get you some augmentation if you're not able to fix your hand, or you want to go down that route. She thanks him. And the party, they part ways. Party is trying to figure out how to address the Still Tower issue and hunt for the dagger. Still Tower, for some reason, seems a bit more pressing to them, and they are trying to figure out how to basically get legal authority, legal sanction to assassinate a lord. Kill a lord, take him on, and they're trying to get the Countess's implicit or explicit backing, and so they contemplate bringing the issue to the Countess. Silvelius hasn't quite been brought in on these plans, and the party at some point discusses it between Selena, Justice, and Gilly. They have quite the conversation about it. Gilly really defends her position very well. She's a lawful character, she's a noble, and she has a lot of concerns about vigilante justice, dispensing justice, as she calls it, against a noble person who is, still legally the noble of a lord. She's the daughter of a baroness, and, while she definitely feels for the plight of the people of Still Tower, she just feels like, there are procedures and processes involved, and then maybe they can try something like that. And they still haven't brought it to Silvelius's attention / notice yet. But the party, apart from Silvelius, have talked about the Still Tower issue, I guess you could say. So Selena and Justice get the idea to go to the College of Whispers to see if they can get some kind of sanctioned effort on this. Selena and Justice talk to the Keeper again about Lord Still Tower. They talk to him about there are two things they are now chasing: Still Tower and the dagger. They talk to the Keeper about Lord Still Tower and about Foreman Biggledue, the Fort Platino murders, so that Justice can hunt down the dagger. He's a rogue. He wants a magical dagger. And the Keeper records the conversation with her hands. It's a sanctioned conversation at first when they talk to her about Lord Still Tower. She has this kind of magical little spark between her hands. She rubs them and talks to them. And she's like, I'm recording this for our purposes, so I can kick this up the ladder, so to speak. They tell them what they've witnessed. The Keeper says, we do have some information on him. We do know about this. However, it's just the plain truth is that he's a lord. We can't just go all, around killing people. we're going to have to do this one kind of off the books, but we can guarantee you, she says, I'm going to talk to my friends at the Imperial Confessory. If the College of Whispers is like the CIA of the Gishari Republic, the Imperial Confessory is like the FBI. The College of Whispers concerns itself with spying and espionage and information and intelligence. The Imperial Confessory concerns itself with the truth and investigations and national policing. So those are two of the powerful pillars that hold up the Republic. Those two, and the Presidium are probably the three major institutions that you find in the Gishari Republic. The Presidium is the collection of nobles who have voting power. A Congress, a legislature. So she says, we want him dead. We're just trying to figure out. So if you're willing to helm this, we can ensure you won't be federally prosecuted, but you need not to alert anyone beyond this, small circle. So she says, but let me get with my people about the Imperial Confessory. So, as Justice moves the conversation from Still Tower to Foreman Biggledew in the Fort Platino murders, he notices that the Keeper stops recording. And she pretty much waves him off of it. She gives him the runaround. She says, I'm not sure, I don't know a lot about that. I'm sorry, I can't really help you. It's not really on our radar. As far as we know, he was killed. That's where that is. And he gets the hint, and he's polite. He doesn't want to piss off a Keeper. And so the Keeper takes Justice aside and apologizes to him about not being forthcoming before, about some of the information she had on the Shadow Thieves, a woman who fled south named Ilaguth that they had some information on, and says, I didn't know that you were one of Finder Vorsh's pupils. Finder Vorsh is the spy master that is one of the spy masters that trained Justice in the war. Warforged are organized for the spy program, are organized into clutches, kind of small groups, and trained by Finders. Finders are a rank within the College of Whispers / military, and also at the time the military. Finder Vorsh was his apprentice, is the man who taught him how to kill. He is a wood elf. He is respected, and he is actually, then Justice finds out, has been promoted not only to a master, but what we know as a shade in the College of Whisper. And shade is one of the highest office. There's not a lot known about the College of Whispers organizational structure, but they're calling him Shade Master. Shade Master Vorsh now. And so he is really, really far up there and he's a powerful figure in the College of Whispers, and Justice now knows that. So he says, I'll give you a little more information, she says. And she says, the Ilaguth woman, I don't know much, but I know that she went south to find a man, a Goliath kind of messiah figure, known as the Son of Storms. Justice had never really heard about him, but the Son of Storms, that name has now been dropped. So they leave the Whisper House with that information, knowing that they might have a way in to some implicit backing from the Imperial Confessory and from the College of Whispers, and they might be able to do this one off the books, but supported. And that's very reassuring to Justice, who wants to bring down a corrupt lord like Lord Stilltower. He wants to get some practice in against the nobles of the Gishari Republic. And we'll get to Justice's personal kind of crusade and vendetta against the nobility in it later, when it's a little more relevant, later this episode. So, Selena and Justice take that information to Gilly at some point, and she's like, well, let's just take it to Sevilius. They all decide not to clue in the Countess of Avamere on this little side mission, because they figure that she's not going to be too keen on them going off and murdering a member of the nobility, regardless of how corrupt and evil he might be. When they arrive back at the Purple-Eyed Pixie Parlor, they are greeted by a figure. This figure wears gray robes, very kind of a dour expression, tall, thin, gaunt, human, Gish, obviously, and wears a mitre. On this mitre is a golden staff, and at the end of the golden staff is a hook, kind of a hooked blade, and it has a celestial script written, which reads, "The flesh tells no lies," or "The flesh holds no secrets," whichever one you're more partial to. This is a confessor, and his name is Confessor Grantham. He is a confessor with the Imperial Confessory, and he is there. He is greeted. He is accompanied by a couple figures. He is greeted by two heavily armored figures who have metal over their mouths, and these are what are known as recorders of utterances. And then he is also with two mercenaries from the Grantling Company who are apparently serving as bodyguards. He greets them. He's rather polite, formal, all those things. Respectful to a degree. And he talks to the party about a few things. He asks Sevelius about the attack on the train by the elven bandits from the Heathen Collective. And he implies, rather unsubtly, that perhaps Sevelius had something to do with it. Because prior to them boarding the train, Sevelius had the conversation with a political figure known as JJ. JJ is a dark elf, a brilliant lawyer who has defended the Heathens Collective, who has some ties to him, but has been unable to be in prison. He's been in prison before, but nothing sticks to him. He's brilliant, and he might be connected to a terrorist organization. And when he saw Sevelius on the platform, he walked up and introduced himself, because Sevelius is very famous. He matters a lot to elves, and that's what happened. And they had a very polite and terse conversation. This was session 1 of the game, and that was that. And Grantham says, I heard you had a conversation prior to the attacks, And he says, and Sevelius is like, yeah, it was polite, it was terse, all those things. And Grantham says, yes, but there are other forms of communication. There's thieves' cant, there's arcane writ, there's telepathy. Did you employ either implicitly, explicitly, subtle, unsubtle, direct, indirect? And he goes through all these descriptors and basically asks the same question 5 times. Did you have anything to do with this? Did you ask about? Did JJ indicate anything? Did you indicate anything? Was there nonverbal, verbal, implored, explored, yada yada yada? And Sevelius is like, no, and Sevelius handles it pretty well. And Grantham's like, I'm sorry, it's my job, it gives a pretty half-hearted apology. It's pretty clear that Grantham is not a huge fan of Sevelius, and doesn't like how close he is to this blade, and isn't happy about this whole circumstance. Also, Grantham informs them that he has only stopped momentarily here in Cragmandu to do this quick inquiry about the assault at the train, because he is on his way to Antinia, the Flying City, the capital of Avamir, where the Countess reigns. And he is investigating the airship going down, the airship that went down off the coast of Cragmandu, the events of the one-shot. He says, and to that end, the Countess informs them that Dryden's father, who is an airship engineer, has been thrown in prison, is being tried for sedition and treason. So they're all taken aback. Dryden, Carl's character, the ranger, is escorted into a room for questioning, and will not be seen is off the screen for the rest, because Carl wasn't there, and I moved this forward, and we'll talk about that, but that's what happened. Dryden's off screen for now. The Countess says, I'm not intervening on this because, quite frankly, if his father's guilty, I want him hanged anyway. So, I'm making sure they're being respectful. They're not pinning it on anyone, but we're going to make sure that this investigation is fair and thorough. She wants to get to the bottom of this. Who the hell blew up her airship? On the way to the Purple-Eyed Pixie Parlor, I have Justice roll a perception check. Versus a rather high DC of stealth. He rolls very high. He gets like 23, 24, something like that. And he notices a woman stealthing through the crowd. The woman, who you'll blink and you'd miss her. Nondescript, vague, not peasant-like, but middle class. Just nothing extraordinary about this woman. He sees her, and he notices her because this is the woman from the vision he had that was brought on by the maddening energy from the Sorcerer King's mansion when he entered the temple. He sees that woman, and I don't know what he's going to do. He decides to follow her. Now, he goes into stealth and rolls extremely, extremely well, like 3 and 4 times. Very high, like mid-20s on his stealth. 19, 18, 19, 18, plus his stealth of 5 or 6. So he is on her, and she does not see this. And she has a really high passive perception. I won't say how high, but high. And because he was doing so well, I was kind of like lowering her passive perception too, because he had beaten it once and twice, so the third and fourth time I felt like he's going to keep this going. He follows her to an inn which was called the Winking Ice Method. It's another inn in Cragmandu. It's a nice inn, but not as nice as the Purple-Eyed Pixie Parlor. I don't know what he's going to do. He learns her name is Dupla Croy, and from the check-in, she just checks in, and yes, Miss Croy, right this way. Follows her up to her room. Waits a little bit. She goes up to her room. He goes in. He goes upstairs and listens in, and now he can hear him. She can hear him. He can hear her chanting some kind of arcane spell. So Justice rolls very well on his stealth check, gets in the door quietly, creeps up behind Dupla Croy, and puts a knife to her throat, and says to her, "Get up very slowly. Don't move your hands, and don't try to cast a spell." Basically. However, whenever he puts his knife up to her throat, he, rather than finding the pliability of flesh, like you would expect, he feels that his knife is against a surface as hard as stone. Almost like her skin were made of rock or cement or some incredibly hard surface. And I remember Chase saying, "Oh, that's not good." And he was right. So she stands up and she's very confident, and she's completely unfazed by this circumstance. And Chase starts to feel that perhaps the shoe was not on the foot that he thought he was when he decided to get the drop on her. And they have a conversation. He asks her, "Who are you? What do you want with me?" These kind of things. And she tells him, "You know what? I will tell you, Justice. Because when this is all said and done, you won't remember it. Because I will reapply the modified memory spell I put on you." And, everyone at the table is starting to get worried for him. So she tells him, "I am a merchant from Solitude. Solitude is the capital of a country named Dalmaria in the northern continent. I am just a simple merchant from Dalmaria, and I am using you to do some of my business. You have already done so well for me in blowing up the Lion Wind Galleon." And so he now confirms that he was there in the events of the one-shot, which they didn't think they were, and that he was actually the one who blew up the Lion Wind Galleon, although he has no memory of it. She says, "I've applied a Gaius spell to you in order for you to accomplish your next task, since you did so well for me before." He asks, "What is it? What do you want me to do?" And she says, "If Sovelius Amastasia," Rob's character, "goes for the blade of the Vizier, attempts to take it, steal it in any way, you are to kill him. That is the spell that I have put on you." And then at that moment, he takes 5d10 psychic damage and almost knocks him unconscious from the Gaius spell, because he's acting way outside the bounds of his quest. He's acting against his quest giver, right? And she begins to cast a spell, modify memory, whatever it was. He doesn't know. And they roll initiative. He loses. She rolls very well. Her initiative score I don't think was even that high, but he rolled really low. And so she puts the whammy on him, and then he finds himself with no memory of those events. The Gaius spell likely still on him, and he is outside the Purple-Eyed Pixie Parlor just in time for the meeting with Confessor Grantham. So Justice arrives back at the Purple-Eyed Pixie Parlor just in time for the kind of wrap-up with Confessor Grantham. He's told that Dryden has basically been put in a room for questioning. Dryden's father has been arrested, and that's kind of where things are. I remember Selena asks, "Hey, where'd you go?" Kind of thing, because Justice, before leaving, breaking from the crowd, because when he saw that woman he recognized, Dupla Croy, he said, "Hey, if I'm not back in like 30 minutes, come find me," that kind of thing. And she's like, "Are you all right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And hey, basically what he says is, it was someone, because he's been whammied, right? He says, "Yeah, it was someone from the war that I knew, and I don't know, it didn't pan out." He says, and they're like, "Oh, okay." Because he's been all of his spells and whatnot, and maybe even some more of them have been applied to him, and he's back under the firm control, although he doesn't know it, of Dupla Croy. Countess of Avamere informs the group that the Duke of Narshley has requested an audience with Sylvius, and they're, of course, required, since they're his bodyguards, they're kind of going to be attending as well. They go up to Crafter's Keep, which is the castle of the Duke of Narshley. They are escorted into the Hall of Invention, and they are greeted formally by the Duke of Narshley as he sits on his throne, the seat of ingenuity. Accompanying him are one of his housecarls and his enforcer, another bodyguard. The housecarl is described as a fair, nice-looking gnome with a rifle and a very fancy magical dagger. The other one, enforcer Phanos, is a tiefling, but who has these dragon-like features all across his body and vestigial wings. And he's massive. He's 6.5 feet tall. He's 300 pounds of solid muscle. He's a massive black iron hammer. And these are the bodyguards of the Duke of Narshley. And the housecarl, the gnome, his name is Bigglesby. And whenever Justice sees the dagger, he remembers the description that Busy gave him, which is it's like a gold dagger with a blue gem on the hilt, and it's kind of mechanical looking. And that dagger meets the description. And the names are similar, and he's like, this is that murderous gnome from Fort Platino. He's been sitting right here, and I'm going to do something about this. The Duke has a bit of an awkward request of Sevilius, and the Presidium has gotten the idea that although they are going to have the blade in permanent residence at the Imperial Museum, since the country is so large and Cragman and a lot of people can't afford teleportation circles and all the fast traveling means, that the blade should be put on temporary exhibit in Cragmandu, which will give the Northerners the chance to come see the blade before it gets interred in the Imperial Museum. The Duke probably would prefer not to ask this, but he feels like his hands are tied, and so he asks Sevilius anyway. And I think Sevilius / Rob were disappointed in the Duke for even asking him in the first place. But Sevilius agrees and says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, even though he hates the idea with a burning passion, right? Because his hand is forced. He doesn't have many cards to play here, and he's going along for the ride until he gets a better opportunity or more power or whatever. I don't know what his plans are, but that's my read of it. So the blade is to be put on display. And in order to thank Sevilius, the Duke is throwing a party in his honor, in the honor of the blade, inviting all the local lords and even some non-local lords and ladies and all the people of high society, and he's inviting internationally renowned superstar Morgan, a famous star who's currently on an international tour, whose opening act, Glitch, will also be accompanying her. And she and Glitch are going to put on a private concert for Sevilius and the dinner attendees. And this dinner is to happen in a couple days. I think it was in 2 days. So Sevilius agrees, and the party gets excited because they get, to go to a dinner. There's also a smaller, less formal dinner later that night that we hand wave, but that does happen too. So the party they go out on the town to get dressed to the nines. And Chase asked, is our Warforged really expected to dress up? And I was like, well, actually, in the very first game, you met a Warforged who was valet to the Countess. His name was Misserio Duvant. And you did see that Warforged do dress in the presence of lords and ladies. And Justice is like, okay, I'll go get a suit, I don't think he wants to, but he's going to play the part. So the gang, except for Dryden, who's still being held for questioning, get dressed up to the nines. They get both magical and non-magical means of dressing themselves. Cloak of Many Fashions were bought and things like that. And they get all gussied up. Gilly and Selena bond a little bit because Selena's a bit of an outcast and a bit of a rough and tumble traveler, whereas Gilly knows the ins and outs of dressing for fancy parties because she's a noble. Sevilius always looks really, really nice, but he still takes forever getting ready. He's a very beautiful looking elf. He is a beautiful, noble elf, but he still gets ready. He takes forever to get ready, I remember. But they all get gone. They get ready. They get dressed, and they have themselves a little small dinner party that mostly gets hand waved. At some point, Confessor Grantham, I believe, at that dinner party, kind of during the cocktail hour, pulls them aside and says, listen, I've heard from the Keeper and the College of Whispers here that you guys, are looking into this Still Tower issue. And he says, listen, I want Lord Stilltower dead. I want him dead. I want him dead yesterday. And if you guys are willing to do this, then I will release Dryden from questioning. And as long as you guys are able to complete the task, I'll leave Dryden alone. Not Dryden's father, but Dryden. Because he's like, I don't really think he's implicated in the attack anyway, but I could really make life living hell for him for the next couple months, or even throw him in prison. And I'll go one further, the Confessor Grantham says. I will give his father a fair trial, because the Presidium is leaning on the Confessory to just put someone in prison for the heinous act against the Lion family, for the act of terrorism against the Wingallion. And he says, I'll give him a fair and honest investigation. I won't cover for him. If he's guilty, he's guilty, but I'll give him a fair and honest inquiry. And the party says, all right. And then Confessor Grantham agrees to gives the party supplies. So the party the next day, after a small informal dinner, prepare for the larger, more formal dinner, and all the lords and ladies of the realm arriving and whatnot. It's 2 days later or whatever, but they're getting ready. And they hear that Morgan is going to be received by the Duke of Narshley. Morgan, Glitch, and her little entourage are going to be received by the Duke of Narshley at Cragspire, the air spire of Cragmandu. She's arriving on her personal airship. It's a much to do, and we're do you want to be there? Yeah, of course they do. Sylvius is kind of expected to be there, but yeah. So she shows up in a very nice, lush-looking airship that has just lousy with rigmarole and groupies. And so Morgan is this tall, beautiful, impossibly pale elf with kind of dark hair, an outlandish red leather outfit. Glitch is also an elf with black beady eyes, dark hair, tall, lean, good looking, and the two of them together are quite beautiful and quite talented. Oh, aren't they so lovely? And they descend off the airship with their entourage. In the entourage, Gilly spots her twin brother and sister, Corrine and Corwin, who are just a little bit younger than Gilly. And she's very surprised by this, because she had no idea they were traveling with a superstar, and they didn't, she's like, what? I haven't heard from them. What's going on? And so she's like, hey, and once all the greeting is done and the crowd breaks up, Corwin's like, oh, I didn't see you there, apologies for my bad Irish accent, but we're all about doing voices at the table, And Corwin's like, oh, it's good to see you, Gilly, yeah, and so she notices that Corwin has gone through some changes. He's a much stronger force of personality. He seems much more capable, and he does tell Gilly that now knows a little bit more magic than he used to. How did you? How are you traveling with Morgan and everything? And she said, and they say, we went and saw her in concert in Athadia when she was doing an international tour, and we hit it off in the VIP, and we've been traveling with her ever since. They're taking their gap year. They're not going to college like Gilly did. And so they're just enjoying the time, and Gilly thinks that's totally cool. Morgan meets the party, mostly glosses over them. She's incredibly polite to Gilly and Sovilius. She mostly glosses over the other two. She doesn't pay them a lot of attention, but she's super nice to Gilly. She's heard a lot about her, and just thinks Gilly is just the best thing. And she's very happy to see Sovilius. She's an elf, and Sovilius means a lot to people who are elves. And she's happy to see Sovilius and is very respectful, but she's mostly interested in Gilly. We'll go back to their respective homes to prepare for the fancy dinner. They get the scoop. They get the scoop on who will be arriving, and they hear that, of course, the Duke will be there. His wife, the Duchess of Narshley, she's a traveling wizard. She's a very serious person. She doesn't spend a lot of time in Cragmandu, they later learn. She's an artificer and a wizard, and she is in southern Droska doing some kind of crazy, or northern Droska doing a crazy archaeological dig. So they're like, oh, we were wondering if he was married. He's like, no, yeah, that's who she is. She's an archaeologist / wizard / artificer. She's one of them. She's Indiana Jones in a gnome suit. So the Duke is going to be there. The House Carls will be there, and the local lords and ladies will be there from the land. Now, what's interesting is they don't ask if Lord Stilltower will be there. He ends up not showing up, but I thought it was funny that no one asked if Lord Stilltower was coming, and he doesn't. But it's like, oh, you didn't think about that, guys? I thought that was funny. And then they also get the skinny on some southern lords that are coming. The Grand Duke of Midrim, his name is Thor Norian. He is the head of House Norian. And then the Archduchess of the Stone Marsh, Angela Creighton, and the Lord Paramore, her husband, the Lord Paramore of the Stone Marsh, Axel Creighton, are showing up. And those are kind of the three major figures that are showing up that the party's going to get a good crack at. So what they've learned about Thor Norian up until this point is that he was formerly imprisoned. He was imprisoned for crimes that they didn't quite suss out, but basically something happened. However, whenever Gustav Norian died, who was then the Grand Duke of Midrim, it threw the house into a secession crisis. And Thor Norian, so Gustav Norian was assassinated by the Heathens Collective, and in order basically for the Presidium didn't have a house to elevate, someone that they trusted to elevate, and the Countess of Avamere brokers a solution where Thor Norian gets pardoned for his crimes, let out of prison, and elevated back to the status of Grand Duke. Because Gustav Norian was assassinated by the Heathens Collective. It's quite the snafu. It happened way before the campaign. I forget the timeline exactly. I think it was about 10 years ago or so. But yeah, it did happen. It happened, I believe, just after the war. And before that, her brokering of the solution and her duties in the war, the Countess of Avamere and House Lion are moved from a cadet house of House Norian to a great house. Their status is elevated. They are the most recent great house, and Thor Norian is elevated to the Grand Duke of Midrim, and whose capital is Centraga. So he's going to be there. No one's really sure why he's showing up, but the truth is, they kind of later learn, is that he is a lord in need of allies. He is a lord in need of acceptance and belonging, and if there's going to be a party where he can make connections, he's going to be there. He's not a powerful mage. He's not a noted warrior. He's just a guy whose house used to make the trains run on time, but have since fallen out of favor of the more powerful lords and ladies of the New World. So he's going to be there, and then the Archduchess of the Stone Marsh and the Lord Paramore of the Stone Marsh, and they ask kind of, what's their deal? What's the Stone Marsh? Where's it? And it's in the southwestern corner of Gishari, and what they learn is Chase / Justice asks very specifically, what's their deal? How do they treat Warforged? And this is what he learns. In the Stone Marsh is notorious for, it has the worst terms for conscription. They have the longest contracts, the lowest pay, and the worst conditions for Warforged. And after the war, when so many contracts were still where so many contracts were being purchased, the Stone Marsh bought a great deal of them. And the Warforged that got bought up by the Stone Marsh, the houses in the Stone Marsh and the Great House, are in incredibly poor condition. They are worked, to the bone because to the bone, and it is the worst place to end up if you are a Warforged or really anyone who needs to work for a living. But it is a bad place to live. The Archduchess and the Lord Paramore are they're leaders of the conservative wing of the Presidium. They're incredibly authoritarian and just all around, they are those people. And Chase is very eager to get a look at them, and he'd love to murder them, I'm sure, because they are the antithesis of everything he is and everything that he believes in, which is freedom for the Warforged. So that party is going to be later. They're told Miazim or will be the Dragon of Kragmendu, and they're all very excited because they get to, do a little dancing, a little la la la, and they get to see D&D international superstars. And they know that means I'm going to perform for them in some way, and they're going to have a good time, poking fun at me as I try to put on a musical show for my D&D players, because that's just the fun of being a DM, right? So they all show up in the party dressed to the nines in the formal party, honoring the commitment of Sovilis Anastasia to show the Blade of the Vizier to the people of the North. And they meet the lords and ladies of the land, and they get a look at everyone. They meet Thor Norian. They don't really talk to Thor Norian, but they see him. and they see the Archduchess of the Stone Marsh and the Lord Paramore, Angela and Axel Creighton. And they see Axel Creighton's sword, Stonebreaker, which is a beautiful, well-crafted longsword. And so this is at like, this is sounding kind of vaguely, this sounds like this might be connected to me. What is this sword? What is this thing? And he learns that Stonebreaker, so at the conclusion of the Elven Wars, about 150 years ago, 200 years ago, there is like this treaty signed between the elves, the last of the elven lords and ladies, and the humans. Towards the end of the Elven Wars, Sevilius' uncle was shot in the back while leaving a negotiation. He was shot in the back by the Gish. They let him leave, and they shot him in the back with a gun. And his wife, Sevilius' aunt, Anicia Anastasia, was a very powerful kind of stone sorceress. And so she, in response, basically goes after the general who gave the order to kill her husband, and lures him out into a ravine, buries him and his soldiers, and petrifies them, and buries them under an avalanche, and murders them all. Whenever the Elven Concordance are signed, one of the things that is put in there is that the Creightons' ancestors at the time request a magical artifact to be made, and that Anicia Anastasia, this is some years later after she murdered the generals, but that general and whatnot, because that was war, right? She makes the item, and she actually curses it. And Stonebreaker was a cursed longsword given to the Creightons, and it's still actually the house of House Creighton. They're not sure what the enchantment is and whatnot, but that was something that Sevilius learned. And I was like, Anicia Anastasia would be the one who taught you like your booming blade cantrip, because it does thunder damage, and they thought that was neat, and I did too. Because I made it. So Stonebreaker was a cursed longsword. It was cursed at one time. It doesn't appear to be now, but for all I know, it still is. But either way, it suits Axel Creighton just fine, and he uses it. So they meet them, and they find out how stuck up and dismissive the Creightons are, and no one in the party likes the Creightons, and you're certainly not supposed to. Also during that party, a kind of half-elf, maybe even mostly human, but a vaguely elven figure, effeminate, in dark leathers, rather striking, dark hair, with a pistol and a dagger made of pure starlight and void. It's like staring into space, that dagger. An elf, matching that description, named Beverly, greets Sevilius and says, I just wanted to come over, and this is my personality and voice to him, right? It's like, I just wanted to come over and introduce myself. Mind if I meet you, Sevilius? I'm Beverly, that kind of thing. And he's very nice. He flirts with Sevilius, and he's very nice to Sevilius, as most elves are. And towards the end, he just leans in and says, I'll always be loyal to your family and the memory of Solomayor. Solomayor is, again, another elven prince from a different tribe who was lost and is probably dead, but Rob is holding out hope that he's still alive. Because between him and Rob, those two together could unify or maybe do something with the desperate elves that live in Gishari. They mean a lot to the elves, those two together. So Beverly says that and disappears into the crowd, and hardly anyone ever gets a good look at Beverly. At the same time, kind of when all that is kind of happening, once they get a good look at everyone, Justice darts out because he is wanting to inspect Biggle B's room and find out if it really is Biggle. Could it be a coincidence? I need to find and get to the bottom of this. And he ducks out of the way. He gets an 18 on stealth and leaves the party. Justice leaves the party and heads up towards the northwestern tower where he knows Biggle B's room is. He kind of scoped it out earlier because I think he spoke to Biggle B briefly. He goes there and begins to look around in Biggle B's room. At the same time, Glitch begins his performance. And I go into this, this description. I play music. I actually play modern music, but I go into this description of how, the room darkens and, there's all these lights, and I do a good job of it. I'm not going to reproduce that for you guys here, but I do a good job of it. My party was like, they were like, that was they didn't make fun of me. They were like, that was really cool. You really, captured them. I was like, oh, thanks. And so during Glitch's performance, I have them all roll, everyone that's in the room, in the party, even Gilly, roll wisdom saving throws to be charmed. And they all end up, except for Sevilius, they end up enthralled by it. Morgan comes on stage and does the same thing. She gives an enthralling performance, and she does not target Gilly, but she's already been targeted by Glitch. She targets Sevilius, she targets everyone, and whoever else was left not enthralled by Glitch is definitely enthralled by Morgan, except Sevilius. Not enthralled, has his own wherewithal, and he can act if he wants to. Everyone else is just completely starstruck by these international superstars and their performance. Once everyone is enthralled, Sevilius, out of the corner of his eye, I get him having perception, at the corner of his eye, sees Beverly with a dagger entirely made of void, starts stabbing Thornorian, the Grand Duke of Midrim. And the moment he starts to just pick that guy apart with the dagger, a flicker of arcane energy flashes, and he runs for the door. The moment he can't get but 30 paces, and lightning bolts and balls of fire and acid and energy just fly at him, but they all pass through his body like an illusion. And everyone starts to panic and scream as the charm effect is broken, and Sevilius also pretends like he's shocked and didn't just see the whole thing happen. Because I asked Rob, I was like, what are you going to do? And Rob's like, that's a human lord who's basically living up in the home of, my ancestors. I'm going to pretend like I'm loving this performance. I don't see shit. At the same time, Justice, who unbeknownst to him is trailed by Bigglesby. Bigglesby sees him leave the party. Bigglesby is incredibly paranoid, and he follows Justice to his room, to Bigglesby's room. And Justice very quickly hides in a cupboard. Bigglesby comes in. He has his dagger drawn, and he says, I don't know where you are in here, but I'm going to find you and cut you open. And he sounds crazed and angry and vicious, right? Justice bounds out of the cupboard with dust of choking and sneezing that he bought from the Dragon of Cragmandu, throws it down. As a Warforged, he doesn't need to breathe. So the dust of choking and sneezing is a very powerful item for him. And so the dust kicks up. Bigglesby rolls like a 2 on his Constitution saving throw. Just a DC 15, but he fails. He's got like +1 or 2. And Justice takes the dagger from Bigglesby and starts, stabbing Bigglesby. And Bigglesby is trying to make checks every round, but can't make it. At the same time, the utter chaos is breaking loose as the Grand Duke of Midrim is bleeding out on the floor. The Viscount of Antinia, Felix Lyon, dimensions doors out of the room. An automaton in the Hall of Invention is activated, and all this craziness is bursting out. And Selena, in all of that, hears from her cloak, do not be distracted by all of this. This does not concern you. You must go to your friend. He is in trouble. And so she casts haste on herself. She's a land druid of the grassland. She knows the spell haste. She casts haste on herself, and she runs. And she gets away because no one is paying attention to some little some nobody druid from no one's paying attention to her. She gets away. And she goes up to Gilly and is like, hey, Justice is in trouble. Are you coming with? And Gilly goes, no, I gotta stay here and protect Sevilius and stuff. So it's only Selena. Selena is going to help Justice, and I don't know what the hell is gonna happen. Because when I planned this whole thing, we'll get to this later. When I planned this whole thing, it was an encounter designed for an entire party. So I'm very worried that 2 of my players are about to be murdered. So we're gonna see how things pan out. So he's there choking to death, and in about 2 rounds, Justice is just stabbing him. So Bigglesby is incapacitated, but he can still defend himself, Justice, I don't even think technically would have advantage, but I think he was doing a sneak attack anyway. I'm not even sure, but he's just stabbing him, but Bigglesby won't go down. Bigglesby is a hardened killer. He's been alive for a couple hundred years. He has a magical dagger and other magic items on. He's not going down. And so the stabbing, he's getting, he's making his saves around. After 2 rounds, Selena gets there with her scimitar, is like, and starts to cut or cast spells, Eldritch Blast, because she has the Warlock and Initiate feat. And then, boom, the door slams open, and Enforcer Phanos walks in with a black iron hammer wreathed in fire. And he's like, what are you all doing? And Justice goes, no, you don't understand. He's an assassin. He needs to be put down. He's a danger to the Duke. And Enforcer Phanos goes, yeah, of course he goes, of course he is. That's what they pay us for. And so utter chaos is breaking loose both in that room and back in the dining room. Selena is hasted and is now they're both fighting Enforcer Phanos and Bigglesby, who keeps choking, keeps failing his DC con save, and just cannot do anything. So they're beating him pretty good, but Enforcer Phanos gets in the mix and releases a breath weapon that does 7d6 damage, 24 points of fire damage. Luckily, they're saving, and Selena has absorb elements. But they are just now the whole room is lighting on fire, but they're still trying to manage this whole situation. At the very last round, Bigglesby makes his saving throw, and the dagger instantly, once he's not incapacitated anymore, instantly flies back to his hand, and he goes to attack Justice or whatever. Might miss, might whatever, and they fell him. They defeat Bigglesby, and he goes down. He never even got a turn, because he would have done something else had he got a turn, but we'll get to that. So yeah, he never even got to do anything on his turn. He was incapacitated the whole time, and then he goes down. They are now both ganging up Enforcer Phanos, like, we got this. But then as Enforcer Phanos releases his breath weapon and gets I think 1 or 2 recharges, Selena I think goes down, Justice pops a potion in her mouth, Justice go down, Selena heals him, and they're like, chipping away at this guy who just seems to be a sack of hit points, high damage, AoE, might even be able to fly because he has those wings, and they're getting worried. They narrowly defeat Enforcer Phanos, and they leave the room in utter flames. They drag Bigglesby's room out of the body, toss him into the hallway, and are rounded on by guards. They very quickly take the loot before that happens: the dagger, a cowl, and winged boots that Bigglesby was wearing. Who, in fact, once the cowl is off and the illusion breaks, he is in fact a one-eyed dark gnome named Biggledew. And that is where that session ended. Pretty good. And we all just kind of sat there because I didn't even know what the hell had just happened, right? And so let's do kind of the analysis portion of this video now, right? So that was a really, really great session. We all walked away buzzing and just really, really blown away by everything that had just happened. Part of that was me and my ability to describe certain scenes and tee things off. But another part of it was just the choice of what the players decided to do that raised the stakes and made things a lot more interesting than I ever could have imagined. So what I want to talk about today in the kind of analysis portion is encounter design and player power, and then lore as it relates to storytelling, because that's both of what I think was going on here that made it for such a memorable and fun episode for us. So on the first part, what I will say is that Bigglesby was designed to be about a through CR4, CR5. Altogether, it was designed to be about a CR5 encounter, and that's not counting necessarily the magic items. The zip-zack dagger that he has is quite powerful. Enforcer Phanos is strong with a lot of hit points. Bigglesby had a lot of hit points, a lot of things to do. And unbeknownst to them at the time, had a shadow demon he could summon as a action or bonus action, but he never got to because he never got a turn. So whenever Justice gets into that room by himself, I am shitting myself because I think he's about to get horribly murdered. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm about to lose a player because I've designed this encounter with the whole party in mind. I'm trying to get them experience and level so they can take on Lord Stilltower. And so half of the party, actually 4 out of 6 players are not going to be there, and I don't know what to do. But I'm not gonna pull punches. This isn't, I'm not gonna. Enforcer Phanos is gonna show up like they are lean, mean killing machines, and I'm not gonna back down. I'm not gonna pull punches. I'm not gonna break the verisimilitude of the world because of what a player chose to do. And luckily, I ended up not having to. That's to choking and sneezing. I knew it would come in handy for him. I just didn't think it'd be that effective. So whenever they drop Biggledew, in fact. I'm like, okay, maybe they can win this. But then I look at Enforcer Phanos, who can do that breath weapon, is getting those recharges. I'm like, dang, this is going to be a nail biter. And it was. And that was great. And I think the big takeaway from that moment was that your players are powerful. Especially, when they have good ability scores. We did point by. But when they have ability scores and decent magic items and they're smart players, your players are powerful and they could take a lot of punishment. And so don't be afraid to throw challenges at them that seem overwhelming, because most of the time your players are going to be fine. And again, it varies. My players are very smart. They've been playing a long time. Selena not as much, but they've been playing. Chase has, and I have every confidence in them in facing tasks. And that was really cool to see them overcome impossible odds, and they really had a good time, and they were rewarded for it in blessed with magic items. The other part, on a more serious note, I wanted to talk about lore storytelling, right? So obviously Beverly was almost always going to assassinate the Grand Duke of Midrim. Thornorian's days were numbered because of the story I'm trying to tell and other factors, right? And no intervention by the players. And I wouldn't expect him to. There'd be no reason for them to prevent that assassination. I didn't think Sevilius was going to stop him, but he did have a chance. So his days were numbered. The Grand, like I knew when I put him like right like it's all me. I put him in the party to get killed, and I put Beverly there with a void dagger and certain spells on him and all that to give him the best odds. And then, you know, that I played that scene out. And that scene, when it happened, wasn't just me like circle jerking it. Oh, look at this great story that I'm telling. Like, look at all my cool characters and locations and lore, and like, aren't you impressed? Because I think that in D&D and in DM storytelling, and even writing a book or whatever, I think there's a huge risk in falling into that. Like, being so impressed by your own ideas that merely displaying them is enough of its own reward for people to find interesting, right? So that scene worked, and I think I'll tell you why. A couple reasons why it worked. Because prior to the build up to that scene, there were choices all along the way that the players can make. So Vilius, even though like he didn't have a lot of cards to play, he could have said no to the party, right? He could have said no. It just wouldn't have happened, and I would have found some other way to assassinate the Duke or something like that, or at a later time, right? So he said yes to the party. It wasn't much of a choice, but he had some choice, some level. In some world, in some universe, he could, go out on the lam and, become a bandit and do these things, because this is the kind of game we're playing. He doesn't have to be there. Like, this is the character that he chose to play, but he's playing it, but he could change the story dramatically by basically going out on the lam, like being like, no, fuck off, I'm taking the blade, or something crazy. And so he has those choices, and he knows it. So when he agrees to the party is there because they agreed to it. And even though that wasn't much of a choice, it was a choice. Once they get to there, they get to decide who they talk to, what, and, who they're interacting with. And the pieces that are there and the tension that is there are all things that matter to their characters, right? The Duchess and the Archduchess of the Stone Marsh and the Lord Paramore matter to Chase's character, so they're all very interested in that. The Grand Duke of Midrim matters a little bit to their characters, although not as much, because he is a lord who is a part of this republic they all have mixed feelings about. And Morgan and Glitch matter to Gilly's character because sister and brother, Corian and Corwin, they are under this lady's auspices. So there's all this intrigue and all these moving parts. And at the same time, Justice can't do anything about the Archduchess, right? But he can do something about a little gnome and a dagger. And so he goes and he does it. And that's crazy, but it did, and it worked. And then there's this enthralling thing, right? So, like, they get a saving throw. And what the results of those saving throws are influence their ability to act. And they end up failing them, but at least there was a roll. Like, the players who were enthralled, but they got a roll. They had it. And when Silvilius beats it both, he is then given this choice to do something about this Duke being assassinated or do nothing. He probably wouldn't be able to stop Beverly, but who knows? Like, maybe when he sees the dagger get raised and starts to, okay, roll initiative. I'm gonna cast, he doesn't have polymorph, but I'm gonna cast slow or something on Beverly. I'm gonna stand up for what's right. And so that moment was well described, but it was also, there were little micro choices, and there was a lot of tension in the room, and a lot of things that mattered to the characters, but that was also relevant to the lore and the world and the central tension. And your lore and your world are only interesting when they matter to the characters. I'm a firm believer in that. I've played in games where all of a sudden the DM is putting things in front of me about some ancient dragon from some faraway land that has done this thing. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't give a shit. My character's a wizard. He's interested in like learning and exploring and doing those things. And like while that dragon story is interesting to a degree, he doesn't. I don't care. I don't. And you shouldn't. You don't have to. Lore is only lore. The lore of your world it only matters to your players if it matters to them. They're only going to find it interesting if it matters to their characters and what the kind of story they're trying to tell. And the moments that you set up in your game should be relevant to them. They shouldn't be forced into your central tension. They should be interested in your central tension. And if they aren't, then the central tension just becomes something in the background that happens and forms the landscape of their campaign, and that's fine. So when the Grand Duke of Midrim is assassinated, I don't expect them to be like, oh no, the Grand Duke, now what will the country do? Like, I don't expect them to give a shit, right? Why it's interesting to Sevilius is he gets to see a duke a human lord, who is, occupying land that used to belong to him and his family and his citizens and all those things, get knifed to death by a fellow elf. And that's why it was cool for him. And his ability to just be like, I'm not doing shit. I'm going to try to get by with this. Because for all he knows, someone sees him in the crowd. He's like, oh, he wasn't enthralled. Even though actually the enthrall effect, no one's aware that's happening as per the ability being described. But, so there are all these little things going on. And when it comes down to it, in that moment, he had a choice, and he chose just not to act. And I'm so glad he did, because I think that totally makes sense. So when Justice decides to leave the party, he's like, he's like, I can't, not like I can assassinate the Archduchess as much as I'd like to, Lord knows how powerful she is, and it'd be a bit awkward, and I'd probably die, and yada yada yada. So he leaves, and he can do something about that freaking gnome in that dagger, and so he decides to, right? So the moment he's in there, and Bigglesby, who has a passive perception, I think 20 or 22, and Justice got an 18 on the stealth. And so it's all mechanical, and it's all that kind of, it has that quality of finesse and mechanical verisimilitude, right? It's believable, it's understood. So when he gets in that room and is getting ready to go toe-to-toe with a rather experienced and rather dangerous killer decked out in magic items, like, it was up to him to do that. He's the one who chose to, like, go off, break out of the party, get out of the cocktail party, this scene that the DM had set up, right? I didn't expect him to, leave the party and go do that, but he did. And it worked out. I did a little, finagling with the cloak, getting Selena in the room, but it was still really, really cool. And we all walked away from that scene buzzing, and I think the takeaway is put an effort into your scenes, and if you're gonna have a plot or any kind of storyline, make sure it's relevant to your characters. The characters that your players have decided to play, because they are playing those things, they are playing those characters for a reason. Rob wanted to be an Elven Prince. He wanted to be part of the Central Tension. I said, great. And whenever they all heard about that, they were more or less on board. So the Central Tension matters to them. That was a choice they made. And all throughout, I try to include a little something each session to my players. And so far, it's worked really, really well. And I think that as DMs, so much of what we do is by ourselves. And like we spend a lot of time by ourselves creating. And I think we can get into traps about like coming up with really interesting ideas that when applied are not actually interesting to the players. Because it's some storyline and something involving pieces that we only understand the subtleties of because of the world that we built in our head. And although it is really cool if you have that perspective, it's not so cool if all you want to do is like, if you're a character playing a wizard and all you want to do is like open up an academy, like that'd be more interesting, right? So rather than some ridiculous plot about this dragon or this this cult or this demon lord, yada yada yada, portal, yada yada yada, whatever, what would be much more interesting to your player if you just listen to them would be like, oh, you want to open up a school? Okay, cool. Let's open up a school in D&D. In the party and in the fight happening kind of simultaneously was really, really cool, but it was only cool because it's what they want to be and it's what they want to do, and that the events that happen in the world, not all of them will be that relevant to their characters, but I'm never going to expect them to care about the things that aren't relevant to them. And so as DMs, I think it's very important that we always be watchful when we're creating really, really awesome moments to not to make sure that they're awesome for everyone and not just us, because I think there's a real danger in creating something by yourself and forgetting that ultimately the main characters in your story, their choices are not up to you.